Before this episode starts, I've just got a quick update for you if you're listening to this live. The PhD Life Coach membership is going to open in 3 weeks' time, which is the 4th of August. That is when we are going to start taking new members. If you're not on the waitlist already, make sure you go there, check it out, and join. Today's episode is a coaching session where I work with a listener, Becci, who is struggling to get her writing done. You will hear exactly what it's like to be coached by me. This is what we do week in, week out during the membership program. So make sure you check that out and keep listening right to the very end, because I also have a little update from Becci at the end of the episode. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Coach podcast. And this week we have another coaching session. Now, by the time this goes out, there will have been a couple of others in the last sort of 6-8 weeks. It's a little bit of a series at the moment. These are all listeners who responded to a bit of a shout out I did, asking for people who had interesting topics that they would like coaching on. And Becci was one of the very kind students who responded. So thank you very much, Becci, for agreeing to come on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Happy to be here.
So, Becci, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you feel like you want some coaching on.
Yeah, so I come from a counselling and psychotherapy background, but also really into the outdoors. So that's what my PhD has all been about, how we can use the outdoors to promote resilience in young women. And I'm up to the point where I'm 3 years in, well, nearly 3 years in. I have to be finished by October. And I'm writing my discussion at the moment, but I'm finding that really challenging. The rest of the time, I've kind of felt like a way to write things, and there's a structure there already that I can kind of follow and just tweak and think about. But with the discussion, it feels like it's just this blob, like it's just bringing everything together. And it's like, I have absolutely no clue really what that's supposed to look like. I know there's probably no like, it's supposed to look like this, but it just feels like a big blob of bleh. And it's not that I've got nothing to say, it's just that it's just a mess. So I feel like some coaching would be really valuable for me to get a handle on how to even start looking at this mess and making some sense of it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such a common thing, right? That we kind of at the beginning, it's like, okay, do a lit review. Okay, I'm not quite sure what that is, but I can figure that out and stuff. But there is something kind of big and I guess a bit amorphous about a discussion. So yeah, I'm sure this is going to be super useful for so many people. So give me a little bit more background. The rest of the thesis exists, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long has the discussion been your focus for?
Oh, good question. Probably about 6 weeks.
Okay, cool. So you've
Yeah.
been working on it for about 6 weeks. And if I came and peered over your shoulder now, what would I see on your computer? What sort of exists?
About 20,000 words where I've just like spewed out any old stuff that comes to mind that might be somewhat relevant.
Okay, so all discussion, but just kind of stream of consciousness.
Yeah, yeah. And
Okay,
I read through some of it yesterday and was like, even I have no idea what the hell I was on about then. Like,
cool. So real kind of brain dump stuff.
yeah.
Okay. And was that sort of done like consistently over the last 6 weeks, or have you sort of had fits and starts? Tell me more about how this 6 weeks has been for you.
Definitely fits and starts. So there's been like some days where I feel like, oh, it's clicked and I'll write loads of stuff. And then a lot of other times where like I'll write a few words and then be like, I don't know what my point is. And then I go down a rabbit hole of like either looking at other people's discussions in their thesis to try and understand like what that's supposed to look like, or just like looking at random research that I think might be vaguely applicable and then being like, oh, I don't even remember why I was looking at this in the first place. So it has been very up and down.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
A lot of starting and then having some thoughts about it
yeah,
and going off in different directions then from there.
yeah. Yeah. And kind of looking and thinking, oh, I think I understand now what I'm supposed to write, and then start to write stuff and then reading it back and going, no, that doesn't seem right. But we'll just leave it there for now, which I think might be part of the problem, perhaps, is that I just leave everything in at the moment.
Okay. On those days where you think, oh, I think I know what I'm meant to be doing now,
Hmm.
what do you think you're meant to be doing?
Good question. Um, I don't know. I think I get that thought when it's like I've written something and I go, yes, that sort of feels right, but I can't quite put my finger on why that feels right,
Okay.
which might be why I can't do that consistently because I don't understand why it is that that feels right in the first
Mm.
place.
How did it go? So I said at the beginning that often people sort of more intuitively understand what a lit review is and then find the discussion difficult. But let's take you back to that when you wrote your introduction chapter. How did you decide what needed to go in there?
When I was writing my intro, I decided what was going to go in there because I read a lot. So I would think about like a specific topic that was related to my overall topic or question.
Mm-hmm.
I'd read lots and lots of that, and then I'd make lots of notes about what it was I'd read and what felt like it stood out enough that I should write something about that.
Mm-hmm.
I just I wrote consistently, but I did like a block of reading, then some writing, then a block of reading, then some writing. And I just picked out like the main concepts really. So I found that quite straightforward to do.
And how did you decide what order to present that in and how to structure it and stuff?
I think I went with like what feels like the most important concept that I need to talk about first. So because mine is a lot about resilience, that was like I need to talk about that first because that's like what underpins all of this. And
Mm-hmm.
then I thought, okay, so what's the next most important thing? Okay, so outdoor adventure activities. So now I need to write about that. So I think I just sort of went down what are the most important things? And then also thinking about like what was my rationale as well for actually choosing to research that topic in the way that I was researching it.
So you had some notion of what needed to be in an introduction,
Yeah.
and you made some decisions about what order to present it in
Hmm.
because, as with anything, there's no right way. You chose that I'll start with this central concept and then do that concept.
Yeah.
You could have done that in a different order and it would have been fine too, but you made some decisions about that. Kind of makes sense to me. And then once you had a first draft, say, of your intro,
Mhm.
did it mostly stay like that? Did you do dramatic rewrites? Did you restructure? Take me through how that process was.
Yeah, I didn't do any like dramatic rewrites, although I did put in like an extra section recently
Okay.
because it just helped to structure my other chapters if like there was certain information that was in the
Yeah.
introduction.
Perfect. Yeah.
So that was like one of the bigger changes. And then it has been sort of restructured because when I read through it more recently, I was like, the way that I presented certain theories didn't run sort of chronologically. So then it didn't
Okay.
really make sense. They sort of jumped around.
Hmm.
So I moved those about. But I didn't do any like major, oh, I really need to rewrite that section because it's totally like gobbledygook.
So you'd sort of made some decision. I want to talk about this stuff and then that stuff.
Mhm.
But then within this stuff, the stuff about resilience, when you then edited it, you thought actually there's a people on YouTube can see me gesturing wildly with my hands. But you can see you sort of like, oh, actually it would make sense to talk about this resilience theory before I talk about that one. So
Yeah.
you move those around.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. tell me how the discussion feels different to that.
It feels less straightforward. It feels like there aren't specific concepts that I definitely need to discuss, even though is probably not true, but that's what it feels like. It's like
Mm.
it's much less specific in that I can't just go, right, well, it's this is really important to my research, this concept, this is really important to my research, write about those. And
I
also
mean, can't you?
probably. But I think that's part of my issue, maybe, is like trying to pick out what those important concepts are.
Hmm.
And not because I feel like I'm getting lost in the fact that there's lots of them.
Why does it feel like there's more concepts in the discussion than in the introduction?
Um, because throughout my thesis, I've been like building up theory, and now these theories feel very complex and have lots of different elements to them. And so then it feels like I have to unpick all of those, but that feels like an impossible task to do in a limited amount of words and time. So it feels like what I'm trying to do is like pick out the key concepts, but then I'm like, but then I'm missing all this other stuff, which is also really relevant. Why isn't that as important as this thing over here?
Hmm.
Then I like perhaps trying to include absolutely everything. And then there's things outside of my theories as well that I'm like, oh, I should be talking about that, it feels like, because it feels like that's a big important part of it. But there's no space for that.
So are you trying to combine, you say you're developing theories and stuff, are you trying to combine those theories into some sort of unifying framework, or are they distinct from each other, sort of covering different elements of this?
A bit of both. So I've got like 13 theories that are like very specific, and then I'm hoping to combine all of those into one sort of three framework that's a bit more usable really for practitioners. But all those individual theories are also important.
Have you developed that framework yet?
I've developed a version of that keeps changing every 5 minutes based on whatever idea I've had about what my discussion should look like that day.
And is your discussion where you're presenting your unified framework?
Yeah.
Okay. So what makes the unified framework keep moving?
My ideas about how much I should include and what is useful to include. And then when I think I've got a handle on that, I then think about the type of methodology I'm using and that I should be focusing on this other thing that's not actually in there anymore because I thought it wasn't maybe that useful for people. So it kind of moves around depending on what perspective I'm looking at it from, I guess.
Mhm. Okay. So the reason, just for everyone listening, the reason I'm kind of burrowing in on this is I think you've actually got two different tasks here. I
Hmm.
think you've got the task of deciding your unified framework,
Yeah.
and you've got the task of writing your discussion.
Hmm.
And I think part of the problem is you're trying to do them both at once.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily a problem in the sense of, some of the drafting of the discussion might help shape your thoughts
Hmm.
about the framework. But at some point, the framework needs to be solidified so that you can finish the discussion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. And I do wonder whether part of the problem that I have with this at the minute is that it feels like like a massive part of my thesis, and that I don't want to just like, if I settle on an idea and go, yes, that's what I'm using, then I want that to be like right, for want of a better word. I know there'll be no right or wrong really, but I want that. I want to be really happy with that and certain that like that's how I want it to be. And I think maybe because it feels so important and so big, it's like I can't settle on it because I'm maybe looking for like this perfection that isn't ever going to materialize.
Because what would a right and perfect theory look like? How would you know it's right and perfect?
I don't know. To be honest, and I think, yeah. Well, I am aware that that doesn't really exist. Um, so it's probably a bit pointless sort of trying to look for that. I guess what I'm hoping for, I think, is like just a feeling of, because I'm quite intuitive about stuff and I can kind of go, yeah, that feels right. And I just feel like I don't have that with this at all. I just constantly going, no, it can't be done.
Because what do you think makes it hard to declare it done?
Maybe like a fear of getting it wrong and it not being what I want it to be.
Yeah. And why would that be bad?
Because at the end of the day, I have to defend it. And if in like a few months' time, I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think that's actually right anymore, then I guess I'm maybe worried about having to defend something that I no longer believe to be true.
I mean, is that what you would do in the Viva?
That's what I feel like I had to do. Whether I would actually do that, I'm not really sure. Because I haven't really thought about what I would do if that happened. I think because I've been so focused on not letting that happen.
I mean,
Um,
what does defending it mean to you?
oh, what does defending it mean to me? Like being able to say why I think that is the case and the evidence that I've got to back that up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The only thing we have to tweak there slightly is just the tense. So defending this in your Viva is explaining why you did it the way you did it.
Mhm.
That has no resemblance to whether you still think that is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
This is why I chose to do it, the way it's presented in front of you. And then to some extent, you get to see how the conversation goes, right? Because if they start saying, well, actually, why didn't you combine those ones together and have that as a separate element? And at that point, you can go, you know what? I've been thinking the same thing since I wrote it. I actually think it might make more sense. That is something I'd love to hear more what you're thinking, and have a conversation about that because you can make changes after your Viva, right?
Yeah.
That's how this stuff works. You get corrections. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily like launch into, by the way, I think everything I wrote is wrong. I've changed my mind. But you can still explain why you did it the way you did it.
Yeah.
Wait and see what they say.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it like that. Yeah, because I guess like ideas change all the time, don't they? And as long as you can explain why you did what you did at the point that they've read it at, then I guess, yeah, that's maybe what the discussion bit is about. And yeah, I never really, I think because I acknowledge that I'm gonna have corrections because like, I hear that pretty much everybody has corrections. So that's like, yeah, there's things are gonna change in it. But I think I've very much been thinking along the lines of, well, it has to be as close to perfect as I can get it by the time I submit it.
It has
Um,
to be defensible.
yeah. And then, yeah, not really thinking that actually if I did change my mind about something and that then came out in the Viva, then I can change it and that would be fine.
So I think this is really interesting one because for a lot of people, their kind of main propositions, I guess, are made in the results chapters, right? And they share their findings in the results chapters. And then in the discussion chapter, they're really kind of contextualizing that to other literature, explaining what it means and things like that. Whereas actually, there's an element to which for you, your discussion is a little bit resultsy in the
Yeah.
sense that you're presenting this framework.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that does make it a slightly different thing. And I think part of the issue here is I think you're not distinguishing that that's slightly different than your average, if you've done a big qualitative study, here's all my themes and whatever, here's this, da, 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 and then you're not presenting a new framework, you're just talking about what this means for outdoor education in the future or whatever,
Yeah.
then it's a little different. So I have a question that might help clarify some of this stuff. So once you've presented this framework in your
Mhm.
discussion, what would be the next steps for either you as a researcher or for people who've read your work in the future who want to build on your work in the future to take that framework and do things with it? What would be the next things that people might want to do with a theoretical framework?
Um, Applying it to interventions,
Mhm.
which I sort of did in one of my other, well, I did do in one of my other chapters before I like refined the theories. But yeah, so it would be, yeah, applying that to interventions and perhaps on a larger scale than what I've already done
Mhm.
within my thesis. Um,
So they'd be
yeah,
testing it essentially.
yeah,
Yeah. Because I think that is also really important because the next steps of changing a framework or adopting a framework, depending on what happens, is to test it in some sort of intervention way or in some other way.
Mhm.
And then to decide from there whether it stands up to that next test or whether it needs modifying or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, is that fair?
yeah, yeah, that's absolutely fair. Yeah, it also makes me think of something that I've not actually considered is that because I've taken a realist approach, like from a realist perspective, no theory is ever like perfect. It is going to be fallible and it constantly should be being revised. So kind of missing the point by trying to do something that's like a perfect theory because that doesn't exist and isn't supposed to. Hmm.
How does that feel noticing that?
Kind of freeing because it's like I do what I can do at this point with the knowledge that I've got now. And actually, the point is that it would be, yeah, tested and refined further anyway,
Mhm.
or tested and adopted depending on what happened. So yeah, it feels, yeah, freeing, I think. Mm.
And that means you could potentially change things as part of your corrections if it comes up in the Viva or the defense, as it's known elsewhere in the world. But it also means that you've got the option to write this up as a moment in time, essentially.
Mhm.
That at this point, without more data, without this being used in a different context or tested in some other way,
Yeah.
here's a pretty good representation of what I think this theory is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually really, really helpful. Because it's just thinking about it in that slightly different way, isn't it? This is what I think right now. But yeah, there's limitations to that. I had already thought about the limitations and kind of put that, but then not really, I don't know, viewing the work really through that lens. I think maybe I was like putting it as a limitation because it felt like I should, instead of
Yeah.
understanding like that actually is a limitation.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was talking to some, in fact, it might even have been when I was recording another podcast this week. Somebody I was coaching this week anyway. We were talking about how it can sometimes be really freeing and inspiring to remember that the end of your thesis is the beginning of somebody else's.
Mm. Yeah, I like that.
Somebody else will read your thesis or will read the papers that come from your thesis and will go, oh, that's really interesting, but I can see a gap.
Yeah,
And that gap's where I'm going to write my PhD. I'm
yeah.
going to take this and apply it in children, or I'm going to take this and apply it in dance instead of outdoor ed or whatever. Because that's what we've done, right?
Mm.
You've read
Yeah,
people's research, you found it fascinating, you've spotted stuff they haven't done that in no way undermines the work that they did.
yeah. It's just different.
And now you build on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd never really thought about it like that before. That's a really nice way to think about it. Mm.
Quick interjection. If you're finding this episode helpful, but you're driving, walking the dog, or doing dishes, just remember this. When you're done, head to thePhDLifeCoach.com and sign up for my newsletter. We've all listened to a podcast and thought, this is great, I should do something with it, and they didn't. That's why I created the newsletter, to help you actually apply the stuff that you hear. Each week, you'll get a short summary, some reflective questions, and one simple action that you can take right away. You'll also get access to a searchable archive of all the past episodes, so you can find the exact one that you need to help with your current challenges. Plus, all newsletter subscribers get a free webinar every single month on a topic that affects all PhD students and academics. And you will always be the first to hear for when my membership opens to new members. So once you're done listening, or even right now, go sign up for my newsletter and make sure you don't miss out. So let's go back to a couple of practicalities. As far as you're aware, what bits need to be in your thesis? So in your introduction, it sounds as though you kind of went with sort of concepts like, I need resilience, I need outdoor ed, da, da, da.
Yeah.
In the discussion,
Mm-hmm.
what sort of almost what jobs need doing? I need a block that does this job. I need a block that does that job. Let's have a brainstorm about what that is.
Yeah. I need a block. I'll start easy. That summarizes what I've done so far and like the main outputs of that.
Yes, good. So we need a relatively brief summary of the main outputs. Perfect. What else? What other blocks do we need?
Um, for me, I need a block about how these refined versions of the theories came to be,
Okay.
because I haven't covered that elsewhere.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So we need a block about how they came to be. What else?
A block about what they are.
Yeah, a block presenting the framework, essentially.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am proposing this framework for these reasons.
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
And then it gets trickier because I think then I'm not really sure. And
Think
then
about other people. So if it's hard to think about for yours, let's put
Yeah.
yours to one side. You said that sometimes you procrastinate by looking at other people's chapters. That's great. Love it. What blocks do other people put in their discussions?
Well, I think what struck me about other people's discussions is they're all so different.
Mhm.
So it's really hard to say what they had in them. I guess there's always something about the like bigger theories that underpin what they've found.
Mhm.
Like essentially, why might I have found what I've found based
Yep.
on the theory?
So something that recontextualizes it back into the literature, whether that's back into the theory, whether it's back into other empirical data. Have you ever seen the funnel that describes both articles and theses. Those of you on a podcast listening to this audio, I'm going to try and explain what I'm drawing. If you're on video, you can see the picture. So essentially, if you imagine like a bow tie on its side, like a funnel with a narrow bit in the middle and then a funnel back out again, a research article or a thesis should roughly be shaped like this. We start nice and wide. So I'm going to guess your introduction starts something about why lack of resilience is a problem and blah, blah, what issues it causes for mental health, things like that. Then it probably goes into something about how outdoor ed has been demonstrated as an environment in which resilience can be found. So we're getting a little bit more narrow because we're not just talking about resilience, we're talking about resilience and outdoor ed. Then probably go through some theories of resilience or theories of how it, evidence that it can be changed in outdoor ed, and then you get all the way down at the end of your introduction. And obviously with a full thesis, this is a bit more complex than I'm doing here, but in an article, usually you then have a final paragraph that says something like, therefore the current study will blah, 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 blah. Okay. And that's the end of this first bit of the funnel. And then your research is this very narrow bit in between. The what I did and what I find is the very specific to you, very narrow. And then in your discussion, you usually start with the current study found blah, 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 like you said, bit of a summary. And then it starts getting wider again. It starts recontextualizing it back out into the world. Okay. And then there's a couple of chunks in here, which I'll talk about in a second, that you definitely need. And then by the end, you finish with some sort of conclusion that brings it back out to its widest thing, probably relates back to where you started the introduction. That just sort of zooms right back out again and says, therefore, this theoretical framework has the potential to improve the way that we build resilience in young women with this benefit. Or whatever.
Yeah.
So we start wide, we come on narrow, 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 we do our thing, we build it back out again, and there we are. And the nice thing, if you can imagine two of those sat on top of each other, this bottom of your funnel becomes the top of somebody else's funnel, and they start coming back in again for their piece of research.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So we definitely want stuff summarizing. We definitely, for you, like presenting the theory and how it fits with other theories, how it kind of helps explain things we've seen in the literature, Can you think of any other chunks that need to go into any discussion?
Yeah, strengths and limitations.
100%. Yep. So we're going to have a strengths and limitations bit.
And recommendations and future research.
Beautiful. And then we're going to finish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Simple as that.
But I want you to notice, and when you listen to this podcast, you'll be able to go back and listen to this for yourself. And it was certainly true in the email that you sent me. I want you to notice how much you were telling yourself, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
I've got no clue. It's a mystery. I could even pull up. I won't bully you. Let's see. Here we go. Here's the email. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm flailing around in the dark. Wondering, spewing out thousands of words and wondering what my point even is.
Yeah. It sounds about right.
But it's not true.
No, it's not.
Because you've just told me all the bits that a discussion needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the trouble is, I'm sure it feels like that. I'm not undermining the fact that inside here, it feels like you're flailing around in the dark. 100% get that. But it's really important you don't tell yourself that's true. Because it might feel like you're spinning out of control, but you know what chunks this needs.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Apparently.
And when we tell ourselves we don't, it becomes this impossible. I just can't. It's like, have you ever seen the videos online where there's like a little kid and he looks like he's drowning? He's like flailing and flailing and panicking and panicking. And then the mum goes, put your feet down. He's like, oh, I can't swim. Feet down. Can't swim. I can't swim. And then he puts his feet down. He stands up and the water's up to about his chest. He's like, put your feet down. You're fine. And that's not to say his panic's not real.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit like that now, I think, that I can't do it. I can't do it. I don't even know what's involved. I have no idea. I'm just flailing around. It's like, put your feet down for a second. Just put your feet on the floor.
Yeah.
You know some of the bits that this needs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I just keep telling myself that same story, don't I? Of like, I don't know. I'm confused. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. But I'm writing something, so I must have some inkling of what's supposed to be going in.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, I've been able to say what sort of sections need to go in it. So I do, yeah, I must have some idea.
Now, when you think about this 20,000 words or whatever that you've written,
Hmm.
and you think about, if we think about those sections that you just came up with as buckets,
Yeah.
do you have a feel, either off the top of your head or if you went and looked at it, for which bits would get thrown into which bucket?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Like I'd have to go back and read parts of it to understand where they fit. But um for the most part, yeah.
And do you feel like there are some buckets that you've written loads for that's a bit of a mess and some buckets that you haven't written for? Or do you feel like you'd have bits in all of them? Or
I think there's definitely like ones that I'd have quite a lot in, um, and ones that would be quite sparse, or maybe not sparse, but like just very descriptive, which I know just isn't, yeah, it means just isn't finished,
yeah.
basically.
So I think that's a useful exercise to do,
Mm,
is to almost give yourself Word documents that are your buckets and start chucking them out in to the
yeah.
different bits. The other thing I want to really, we'll come back to this thing about decisions in a second, but the other thing I want you and everyone listening to be really clear on is writing is many different things and it has many different purposes. And I think often PhD students get this mixed up because usually we think of writing as a way of generating the end product.
Yeah.
Yeah. Writing is how we are creating the thesis that we hand in, which is absolutely true. You have to do that bit of writing. But writing is also a way of thinking and a way of understanding what's in your brain, understanding what you don't understand very well, testing ways of saying things, testing ideas to see if they make sense when you write them down. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a really good way of thinking. But what we often end up doing, and I wonder whether this is what you're doing, you can tell me, is we're doing that. Really, we're using writing to think, but we're beating ourselves up that it doesn't look like an end product.
Yeah, I think because I do a lot of like writing to think intentionally. So I've got lots of other documents of just like process notes essentially.
Mhm.
Um, and then think I just think that the other document that has the title discussion chapter
Yeah.
is supposed to look like whatever a discussion chapter is supposed to look
Yeah.
like. And when it doesn't, I'm like, ah, that means I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, perhaps I am just doing more of the thinking just on a document with a different name.
I think so.
Mm, yeah.
So, how do you go from, at what point do you transition and how from writing as thinking to creating a piece of writing as an end product?
Um, think about like what makes me then open up a document to name it like whatever chapter instead
Okay.
of just like process notes. It would be usually it would be having some idea of what it is I want to say and
Yep.
understanding what the structure of that needs to look like to get that message across.
Okay.
I think what might have happened with my discussion chapter is like getting a bit impatient and just going, yes, I'll figure that out as I go along, but then being confused about why I haven't already figured it out before I've started, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, I don't know that it's necessarily impatience, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but I think that a lack of clarity as to whether you're writing the discussion that you will hand in or whether you are still writing to understand the points you want to make.
Yeah,
I think you've told yourself you're writing the discussion as an
yeah,
end product, but because you haven't yet decided exactly what your point is or what the structure should be, you're actually writing as thinking, which is
mhm,
absolutely fine. There's no problems with that,
yeah,
other than you're expecting it to somehow end up as a discussion that you can hand in,
yeah.
when that's not what you're doing. You're just thinking on a piece of paper.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happened.
So, in order to get, you said in order to start writing as an actual product, you want to know the point you're trying to make. And remember, that doesn't have to be the point you're trying to make for the entire discussion, but for each of those sections we're talking about, you need to know the point you're trying to make and the first attempt at a structure. We're obviously going to restructure things if we want to as we go through, but a first attempt at a structure. What makes it difficult to go from your kind of writing as thinking thoughts on a piece of paper stuff
Mhm.
to deciding what you're going to say and having an approximation of a structure?
I think having lots of ideas and not being able to discern which ones feel like they hold the most weight. Um, because then it's like I'm just trying to make too many points. So then I don't make any of them in any particular depth or very well. They're just loads of ideas. Um, and then the structure, I think again, like if I understood what I was trying to say a bit better, I'd then be able to structure it fine because I'd be like, well, this is this idea and this is this idea. But
Yeah.
because there's like just all these ideas and I don't really know which ones should hold more weight than others.
The structure problems comes from the other bit.
Yeah.
100%. This is exactly the same as anybody who, like me, believed that the solution to being able to do everything was to find the right planner and jam it all in, when actually the problem was you're putting in too many things. Or the people out there who think that the key to making your house less cluttered is to go and buy new plastic boxes to put things in. That's the same thing. If you've got too many ideas, there is no structure that's
Mhm.
going to make all of those ideas come together and make sense.
Yeah.
So, what makes it hard to pick one or to pick a key idea that you want to focus on or a key framework?
Um, I think again, it's like what we were saying earlier on about trying to decide upon when is my overall framework done. It's just yeah, not wanting to make a decision because not being totally convinced that any of them are 100% right, but that's because that doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like reluctant to get rid of anything because that might be the one that turns out to be correct, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Um,
100%. This is, and we talk about this in our membership a lot with my clients. This is not a don't know problem. This is an I haven't decided problem.
yeah,
Yeah. There
yeah,
is no knowing. There is no I'm confused. I'm not sure which it should be. This is a I haven't decided what this framework looks like yet. And there's
yeah,
lots of reasons for that, right? It feels, especially at the end of a PhD, it feels like a really big deal to like put the capital letters on your theoretical framework and say, yep, this is the framework I'm putting out into the world. I'm hanging my hat on that. It feels like a massive deal. So I don't want to like undermine that feels scary. But this isn't the you don't know. You're just avoiding the emotions that might come with picking one of the versions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that extends out to like deciding what points I want to make within the rest of my discussion. Because it's like,
100%.
yeah, I don't want to make a decision about it. Rather than, it's not like I've not got any ideas. I've got 20,000 words worth of ideas.
Yeah.
But I just can't decide which ones I want to stick with.
You're choosing not to decide.
Yeah.
It's not can't. You're perfectly capable of deciding. If I said, I've got £1 million in a box for you over here, if you can email me a version of your theoretical framework in the next half an hour,
Yeah.
I reckon you'd pick.
Oh, yeah.
You're more than
Absolutely would.
You're more than capable of picking. You just haven't chosen that you're going to yet.
Yeah, I think that is very true.
And now with small things, it's easy to go, just pick. It's fine. It doesn't matter. You can make it either work. It's fine. With something like this, though, where, you want to have your best shot at this, what I would really encourage you to do is go, okay, I haven't made a decision about this yet. What process do I want to go through in order to decide? So it's like if you were buying a car. Okay, that can be really overwhelming, right? There's so many options. It's a stressful decision. It's a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. You say, okay, my process is I'm going to go to these 3 garages. I'm going to narrow it down to price range this, features that, whatever else, color, who knows. And then I'll narrow it down to 4 cars. And on the basis of that, I'm going to do this. And my priority, when push comes to shove, is going to be price, say. Okay, that's not necessarily a right way of doing it. Everyone would have a different version of that. But that's what I want you to think about for your framework. And it's something you can discuss with your supervisor is what options have I got? Like realistically, how many different ways could this framework look?
Yeah.
And I have no idea whether there's like 40 ways this could look or whether actually you're picking between 2 or 3 nuanced versions.
Yeah.
What are my options? And what process do I need to go through in order to pick? Because then you decide, okay, and then I pick, and then I look after the emotions I've got about that decision.
Yeah.
Because you will have emotions, you will have these, or what if I pick the wrong thing, or I really like that bit, that was really good, or whatever, you will. But the truth is, there's a whole load of emotions, as you've learned, around not making decisions too.
Yeah.
And they feel rubbish.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't get anything done either.
This can
Yeah.
sound like a strange question. Are you going to hand in your thesis?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you are going to make this decision at some point.
Yeah. I am. Yeah, because
You
I've
are,
got yeah.
because you're going to hand it in. And even if, one option is that you only vaguely make a decision, and so you hand in something vague and that is your decision, or you're going to pick one version of this a bit more concretely, and that's
Yeah.
what you'll hand in.
Yeah.
But you are going to choose this. So you get to pick when you're going to choose this.
Yeah. Is what's that process, isn't it? To go through to pick stuff. And I've had to pick lots of things along the way. So I obviously have ways of doing that. I'm trying to think what my ways of doing that have been. Because I must have done that. I think what I did right at the very beginning, I had to like pick between basically my initial theories and ideas that I had about why things work. And I had like probably about 100 different ones. And I had the same thing there of like, how do I narrow that down to being just like, I don't know, less than 10? And I remember going through a process of printing everything off cutting them all up and sitting on the floor at my mum and dad's house when I was looking after the cat and just like organizing them into like different piles and then deciding what I thought about them. And I don't know how I would do something similar here. And I don't really know how I then decided between the piles, but there must have been some way of doing that.
Mm.
But I'm wondering if I could do a similar sort of thing.
Yeah. Whether there's some mechanical way of actually, almost drawing. I've got this version of a framework, I've got that version, I've got that version, and drawing as many versions as you've got.
Yeah.
Because it's a bit like, when you're clearing out your wardrobe or something, right? You're like, oh, but I do wear that sometimes. I do quite like it. So yeah, I'll keep it or whatever. But then when you go to your wardrobe to put something on, I bet there are things that, with all the grey sweatshirts, I usually pick this one or whatever.
Yeah.
You get to do that. Even with theoretical frameworks and things, it's like between those two, this one just makes more sense to me because X, Y, Z. Okay, cool. Well, what about this one up against that one? Well, actually, yeah, I kind of like that one a bit more. And then you think, are there ways I can combine what I like of both of those into some sort of other version? But so sort of holding each, two, rather than being like, how do I pick out of these 10 versions? Picking two, which make more sense out of these two. That one can go over there. That's the charity shop pile for now. Right, compare this to another one. Which will I pick out of those? Pick two other ones. And we bring it down to 3 or 4. And then from there, we're like, right, what characterizes that one? What characterizes that one?
Yeah.
And there isn't a right way of picking. You can pick which one fits my data the best, which one fits my philosophical beliefs the best. And with any of those are perfectly legitimate. You just have to be able to explain it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've been trying to, like, I've not been comparing stuff. I've just been thinking about them in silo. So then it's like, well, they've all got some kind of merit, otherwise I wouldn't have done them in the first place. But yeah, that might actually be really helpful to compare them to each other and then decide. And I wonder if that is what I did right back at the beginning when I had my initial ones, is like I looked through them and compared them and thought about which ones fit the best rather than just staring at the same ones and going, well, yes, that's true. And then looking at another one going, yeah, that's probably true as well. So yeah, that comparing them might actually be really helpful.
Amazing. So, do you feel like you've got some next steps that you can
Yeah.
take to kind of tackle this?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely need to firm up my ideas about the theory and the framework before I try and like actually put the, because essentially my discussion is discussing the ideas within that. So if my ideas about that are all over the place, and of course the ideas on my document are all over the place.
Yeah. I wouldn't do any more discussion work until you've fixed on a framework. Because
Yeah.
even the limitations, and some of the limitations will be generic because they'll be about the methods that you used and
Yeah.
things. But any limitations to do with the interpretation and stuff is going to depend which framework you're talking about. Future directions will depend which version you're talking about. So, and it sounds as though you've already got a load of text that you can draw on when you're ready to start
Yeah.
writing. But yeah, getting that bit really pinned down and knowing that that's a decision. It's not a solution, it's a decision.
Yeah, I think that'll really help to then be able to actually write something. Um, for sure.
Yeah. You're not in the dark.
No.
You're not flailing around.
No.
You've made complex decisions before.
Yeah.
You're going to make a decision about this one because you are handing it in.
Yeah. And when I do hand it in, it doesn't have to be, this is perfect and my ideas can't change about it ever, because that's the point.
100%. That's your postdoc work or somebody else's PhD or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Research is the end of one story and the beginning of the next, always. if no one ever did any work to follow up your research, that's pretty boring.
Yeah, it's a waste of time, isn't it? That's the
Yeah,
case.
we don't. That's the thing is often, especially as PhD students, we want our thesis to be like the final word on a topic, like ta-da. But actually, that's the most depressing thing in the world. No one wants to be the final word in a topic. We want to inspire a whole load more people to be like, oh my goodness, that's so interesting. What a fascinating framework. We could use that in this context. I wonder whether that would work just as well in this context, or using this measure instead of that measure, or whatever. That's why I want people to take it.
Yeah, that's what I want, is I want it to be, used in the future, not just sat there looking nice. There's no point in that, is there?
Exactly. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on, Becci. I know this is something that lots of the listeners will be struggling with too, or will be even anticipating struggling with if they're not at that stage. So thank you for being so open and honest. And thank you everyone for listening, and I will see you next week. So I mentioned there'd be a sneaky update at the end of the episode. And that's because a few weeks after I recorded this episode with Becci, I got an email from her just updating me. She said, I'm just getting in touch with a quick update. I've now finished my discussion chapter and sent it to my supervisors for comments. Yippee! I know it is far from perfect and I'm okay with that. I'm just looking forward to hearing what my team think. The coaching really helped me to understand what was in my way and how I could think about it all a bit differently, so thank you. I've also been shortlisted for PhD Student of the Year and got a job since we last spoke. So it is celebrations all round at the moment. This is obviously a gorgeous message to receive, and it shows how much just a little bit of coaching, a little bit of thought work can really help you take huge steps forward. So massive congratulations, Becci, and I hope to see lots of you who are inspired by this on the waitlist for the membership soon. Thank you for listening to the PhD Life Coach podcast. If you like this episode, please tell your friends, your colleagues, and your universities. I'd appreciate it if you took the time to like, leave a review, give me stars, stickers, and all that general approval as well. If you'd like to find out more about working with me, either for yourself or for people at your university, please check out my website at thephdlifecoach.com. You can also sign up to hear more about my free group coaching sessions for PhD students and academics. See you next time.